Noah Parker knew he was in trouble the moment he saw the apartment listing. The rent was suspiciously affordable. In the city, that usually meant one of two things. The building was falling apart or the landlord was unbearable. As Noah dragged his suitcase up the front steps of Hayes Apartments, he quickly realized it was the second option. The building itself was surprisingly nice. Not luxurious. Not modern. But clean. The brick walls looked well maintained, flowers sat neatly beneath the windows, and someone had clearly taken pride in caring for the property. That someone turned out to be standing directly in front of him. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dark-haired. An alpha. Noah immediately recognized him from the scent alone. Even without the scent, it would have been obvious. The man carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that made people straighten automatically. He looked less like a landlord and more like someone who commanded armies. His gray eyes landed on Noah. Sharp. Assessing and calm. Noah instantly forgot half the things he wanted to say. The alpha looked annoyingly attractive. "You're Noah Parker." It wasn't a question. Noah adjusted his grip on his suitcase. Yes." The alpha nodded. "I'm Blake Hayes." The landlord. Of course he was. Noah had spent 2 weeks exchanging emails with him. The messages had always been brief. Professional. Direct. Apparently Blake communicated in real life the same way. "Come inside." Noah followed him into the building. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paint. Everything looked spotless. Which honestly made Blake even more intimidating. People who kept buildings this clean usually had standards. And standards meant rules. A lot of rules. Noah wasn't wrong. 10 minutes later he sat in a small office holding what looked suspiciously like a textbook. The building handbook. Blake sat across from him. Pages 12 through 18 cover maintenance procedures. Noah blinked. "There are 18 pages?" 24. "Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful." The alpha continued speaking without a trace of humor. "Quiet hours begin at 10. Noah nodded. "Guests staying longer than 3 nights must be reported. Unauthorized pets are prohibited." "Fair enough," then Blake's expression shifted just enough for Noah to notice. "There is one rule I enforce more strictly than any other." The room seemed to grow quieter. Noah sat up slightly. "What rule?" Blake folded his hands together. "No unmanaged heats inside the building." The statement surprised Noah. For a moment he thought he'd misheard. "Sorry?" The alpha's gaze remained steady. "If an omega expects a heat cycle, they are required to make arrangements beforehand." Noah frowned. "What kind of arrangements?" "Medical facilities." The answer came immediately. "Heat centers." The room felt colder. Noah stared, and Blake continued calmly. "No heat emergencies inside the apartments." Something about the statement bothered him immediately. Maybe it was the wording. Maybe it was the complete lack of emotion. Maybe it was because Noah was an omega himself. Whatever the reason, irritation sparked inside him. "That seems harsh." For the first time, Blake's eyes hardened. Not angrily. Just enough to end the discussion. "It's not negotiable." Noah wanted to argue. Wanted to point out how difficult that could be. How expensive emergency heat care often was. How not every omega had family nearby. Instead he swallowed the words. Because he needed the apartment. And because Blake clearly wasn't interested in debating. An hour later Noah unpacked boxes while muttering complaints under his breath. The alpha landlord was attractive. Unfortunately, he was also an ass. The first month passed quickly. Classes. Work. Studying. Bills. The usual chaos of adult life. Noah quickly learned that everyone in the building respected Blake, which confused him. The tenants liked him. Actually liked him. Old Mrs. Dawson from apartment 3A practically adored him. A family on the second floor invited him to dinner regularly. Several tenants greeted him like an old friend. None of that matched the image Noah had built in his head. A cold alpha. A strict landlord. The heat rule alone should have made people hate him. Yet somehow they didn't. It made no sense. One evening Noah returned from work carrying groceries. His feet hurt. His back hurt. Everything hurt. University exams were approaching. His manager had increased his shifts. And his bank account was slowly dying. As he climbed the stairs, he noticed someone crouched beside a damaged railing. Blake. The landlord held a toolbox. Without his usual jacket, the alpha looked surprisingly normal. Less intimidating. More human. He tightened a loose bolt before noticing Noah. Evening. Noah hesitated. Evening. The interaction should have ended there. Usually it did. Instead Blake glanced at the grocery bag. Instant noodles again? Noah looked down. Then back up. The alpha's expression remained perfectly neutral. You counting my groceries now? No, just concerned. The response caught Noah off guard. Concerned? Why? Before he could ask, Blake stood. Try eating actual food occasionally. Then he walked away, leaving Noah staring after him. The interaction lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet somehow it stayed in Noah's mind the rest of the night. Mostly because it didn't fit. Nothing about Blake Hayes fit. 3 weeks later, everything started going wrong. It began with headaches. Then fatigue. Then a strange restlessness Noah recognized immediately. His stomach dropped. No. Not now. His heat wasn't due for another month. He checked his calendar 3 times. Then checked again. The answer didn't change. Something was wrong. Stress? It had to be stress. Between classes, work, and financial problems, his body was probably reacting. That happened sometimes. Nothing serious. Nothing dangerous. Nothing he couldn't handle. At least that's what he told himself. The symptoms worsened anyway. Over the next week, suppressants stopped working as effectively. His concentration vanished. Sleep became difficult. His sense started fluctuating. A very bad sign. A very, very bad sign. Unfortunately, stronger medication cost money. Money Noah didn't have. The cheapest option would be a heat management clinic. Unfortunately, those also cost money. So he did what many struggling students did. He ignored the problem. Surely it would work itself out. Surely things wouldn't get worse. Life laughed in his face. By Friday morning, Noah could barely sit through class. By Friday evening, panic had begun replacing denial. And by Saturday night, he knew he was in trouble. Real trouble. Standing in his tiny apartment bathroom, Noah stared at his reflection. His face looked flushed. His breathing felt uneven. Every instinct screamed the same thing. Heat. Soon. Much sooner than expected. Fear settled heavily in his chest. Because he knew exactly what that meant. The nearest heat center required payment up front. He couldn't afford it. His family lived hundreds of miles away. His friends were broke students. And his landlord had one very clear rule. No heats in the building. No exceptions. Noah closed his eyes. Trying to think. Trying to plan. Trying not to panic. Outside, rain began striking the windows. Inside, his body continued betraying him. And somewhere deep down, a terrible feeling whispered the truth. This wasn't going to end well. By Sunday morning, Noah knew he was in serious trouble. The denial was gone. The optimism was gone. Even his stubbornness was beginning to crack. His heat had arrived. Not fully. Not yet. But close enough. Every nerve in his body felt overly sensitive. His thoughts refused to settle. His skin felt too warm. The scent suppressants he'd taken the night before were barely helping anymore. Noah sat on the edge of his bed staring at his dwindling bank account. The number made him want to laugh. Or cry. Maybe both. A heat clinic was impossible. A hotel was impossible. Missing work was impossible. Everything felt impossible. His phone buzzed. A message from his manager. "Can you cover tonight's shift?" Noah stared at it. Then slowly typed back. "Can't. Sick." The reply came almost immediately. Again? Noah ignored it. He wasn't in the mood. The room suddenly felt too small. Too warm. Too suffocating. He pushed himself upright and shuffled toward the kitchen. Maybe water would help. Water solved most problems. Or at least delayed them. Halfway there, his legs nearly gave out. Noah caught himself against the counter. His breathing grew heavier. A curse escaped his lips. This was bad. Much worse than he'd expected. His body was entering heat too quickly. Almost aggressively. The result of months of stress and poor health. He knew the signs. Every Omega did. Unfortunately, knowing the signs didn't magically solve anything. The first knock came around noon. Noah ignored it. The second knock arrived 10 minutes later. Harder. More persistent. He ignored that too. The third knock sounded like someone intended to remove the door entirely. Noah groaned. Whoever it was clearly wasn't leaving. Dragging himself across the apartment, he unlocked the door, immediately regretting it because Blake Hayes stood outside. Of course it was him. The alpha landlord took one look at Noah and frowned deeply. "What happened to you?" Noah's stomach dropped. The scent. The alpha could probably smell it already. The beginnings of heat. Panic immediately surged through him. "I'm fine." The lie sounded terrible. Blake's expression suggested he agreed. "You look sick." "I'm not." "You can barely stand." "I'm tired." "You look like you're about to collapse." Noah gripped the door tighter. "Why are you here?" The alpha held up a clipboard. Annual apartment inspection. Absolutely incredible timing. He just knew the universe clearly hated him. "No." Blake blinked. "No? No inspection." The alpha stared. Noah stared back. Several seconds passed. Then Blake's eyes narrowed slightly. The realization came instantly. Alpha senses. Noah hated alpha senses. Because suddenly Blake's expression changed. Concern replacing confusion. "You should be at a clinic." Fear exploded inside Noah. There it was. The judgment. The rule. The inevitable eviction. Noah's throat tightened. "I can't afford one." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Silence followed. Immediately Noah regretted speaking. He hated admitting weakness. Blake simply looked at him. Studying him. Thinking. Then. How long? What? How long have the symptoms been happening? The question surprised him. Because it wasn't angry. Or accusatory. It sounded worried. Noah hesitated. A week. The Alpha's face darkened. A week? Noah suddenly felt defensive. I was managing it. You were not. The response came instantly. Firm. Certain. Almost irritated. Noah opened his mouth then closed it again, because unfortunately Blake wasn't wrong. That evening, Noah collapsed. The heat finally hit. He barely remembered crawling toward his bedroom. Barely remembered trying to reach his phone. Barely remembered telling himself everything would be okay. Because none of it was okay. The room spun. His body felt like it belonged to someone else. Pain and heat mixed together until he couldn't separate them. Hours passed. Or minutes. He wasn't sure anymore. The world had become strangely blurry. At some point, he heard someone knocking again. Distantly. Like the sound was underwater. Then louder. Noah. The voice sounded familiar. Another knock came. Noah. Why was Blake here? The thought barely formed before darkness pulled him under again. The next thing Noah knew, someone was shaking him gently. Hey. Stay with me. Noah forced his eyes open. Everything looked fuzzy. For a moment, he couldn't understand what he was seeing. Then reality slowly returned. Blake. The Alpha was kneeling beside him. Inside the apartment. Looking genuinely alarmed. Noah. The landlord's voice sounded sharper this time. When was the last time you drank water? Noah blinked. What? Blake swore under his breath. A very unlandlord-like thing to do. The Alpha immediately moved toward the kitchen, returning moments later with water. Drink. Noah obeyed automatically. Mostly because thinking required energy he didn't have. After several gulps, he finally looked up and realized something. Blake was still there. Still helping. Still worried. The confusion must have shown on his face because Blake sighed. You collapsed. Oh. An excellent observation. Noah was truly contributing to the conversation. You should be in a medical facility. I know. You need professional assistance. I know. You should have called someone. I know. The Alpha rubbed a hand across his face. For the first time since meeting him, Blake actually looked frustrated. Not at Noah. At the situation but at himself. Noah wasn't sure. Then a horrible thought struck him. The rule. His stomach dropped. No heats. No exceptions. Panic surged through him. Please don't evict me. The words escaped before he could stop them, then the room went completely silent. Blake froze. As though Noah had said something shocking. Then the Alpha looked at him. And suddenly something painful crossed his face. Guilt. Not anger. Not disappointment. Noah. The voice sounded unusually gentle. I am not evicting you. Relief hit so hard it almost hurt. But the rule. The rule can wait. Noah stared. The answer made no sense. You said no exceptions. Blake's jaw tightened. For several seconds he didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded strangely distant. The rule exists because years ago an Omega tenant hid their condition. Noah blinked. The Alpha continued staring at the floor. By the time anyone found them, it was almost too late. The room felt quieter. I wasn't fast enough. The words barely rose above a whisper. Yet somehow they hit harder than anything else. Noah suddenly understood. The clinic requirement. The strictness. The constant insistence. None of it had been about control. Or cruelty. Or judgment. It had been fear. Fear of history repeating itself. Fear of another tragedy. Fear of failing someone again. Blake exhaled slowly, then stood. I'm making soup. Noah blinked. What? The alpha moved toward the kitchen. You haven't eaten properly in days. How do you know that? Your trash can. The answer came immediately. Noah stared. The landlord glanced back. You survive primarily on noodles. No, I don't. You do. I eat other things. When? Noah opened his mouth then closed it. Because unfortunately. He couldn't think of an example. Blake looked entirely too satisfied. For the first time since meeting him, Noah almost laughed. The alpha disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Noah staring after him. Confused. Overwhelmed. And for reasons he couldn't quite explain. A little less alone than before. For the first time since his heat began, Noah wasn't terrified. And that scared him almost as much as everything else. Noah woke up to the smell of real food. For a few seconds, he thought he was dreaming. Then he remembered where he was. His apartment. His heat. Blake. The alpha landlord who was apparently in his kitchen making soup. The situation sounded ridiculous when he thought about it. Yet the smell drifting through the apartment was undeniably real. Noah slowly pushed himself upright. His body still felt exhausted. The heat hadn't disappeared. Not even close. But the worst of the initial crash seemed to have passed. At least he could think again. That was progress. The apartment was unusually quiet. Outside, rain continued tapping against the windows. Inside, dishes clinked softly in the kitchen. Noah rubbed his eyes. Then immediately regretted moving. Everything still ached. You're awake. The voice came from the doorway. Noah looked up. Blake stood there holding a bowl. Steam curled into the air. For some reason, the sight felt strangely domestic. The alpha crossed the room and placed the bowl on the nightstand. Eat. Noah looked at the soup. Then at Blake. Then back at the soup. You made this? No, he paused. I summoned magical kitchen spirits. Noah blinked. Blake stared back for 3 full seconds. Then Noah realized the alpha was making a joke. A terrible joke. But still a joke. The discovery nearly shocked him more than the heat. You joke? Rarely. I thought landlords weren't allowed. Blake sighed. You should eat. Noah smiled despite himself. The alpha immediately looked relieved that the conversation had changed directions. That was interesting. Noah picked up the spoon. The soup was surprisingly good. Far better than anything he could cook. Which admittedly wasn't saying much. Still. It tasted like actual food. Something his body desperately needed. Blake sat in a nearby chair. Not hovering. Not crowding him. Just staying close enough to help if necessary. The simple gesture warmed Noah in a way that had nothing to do with the heat. Over the next 2 days, Noah learned several things. First, heat cycles were awful. Recovering from one unexpectedly was somehow worse, and Blake Hayes was nothing like Noah had assumed. That last realization bothered him because Noah prided himself on reading people well. Yet he'd been completely wrong. The strict landlord everyone feared spent most of his free time helping tenants. Noah discovered this accidentally. Around noon on Monday, someone knocked on the apartment door. Blake answered before Noah could. A few moments later, voices drifted through the hallway. Curious, Noah shuffled closer. Just enough to listen. Not enough to be obvious. Mrs. Dawson stood outside carrying a broken lamp. The elderly beta looked frustrated. The lamp looked even worse. I dropped it. Blake examined the damage. I noticed. Mrs. Dawson rolled her eyes. You always notice. I own the building. You're insufferable. The alpha accepted the lamp anyway. I'll fix it. The elderly woman smiled immediately. Like she'd expected that answer all along. Thank you, dear. Then she left and Noah stared. The interaction had lasted less than a minute. Yet it told him something important. Mrs. Dawson hadn't looked afraid of Blake. She hadn't looked intimidated. She looked comfortable. Like someone speaking to family. The realization stayed with Noah long after the door closed. That evening another visitor arrived. Then another. And another. A college student needing help with a leaking sink. A single father asking about repairs. A retired teacher delivering homemade cookies. People kept coming. And Blake helped every single one. No complaints. No annoyance. No expectation of reward. By sunset, Noah had a completely different picture of his landlord. One that made the original version seem almost embarrassing. You secretly like everyone. The observation slipped out unexpectedly. Blake glanced up from the paperwork he was reviewing. What? You help everyone. The alpha returned to reading. That's different. No, it isn't. It is. Noah folded his arms. You literally spent 2 hours fixing a sink. It was leaking. Most landlords would have hired someone. I know how to fix sinks. The answer sounded perfectly reasonable. Which somehow made it worse. Noah studied him quietly. Blake kept pretending to read. Pretending. Because his eyes hadn't moved across the page in several seconds. Eventually Noah smiled. You actually care. The alpha finally looked up. For a brief moment, something vulnerable crossed his expression. Gone almost instantly. But not before Noah noticed. Someone has to. The answer sounded simple. Yet unexpectedly sad. Noah wasn't sure why. The next morning brought an uncomfortable discovery. His feelings were changing. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just enough to make him nervous. Because Blake was becoming important. And that wasn't supposed to happen. The alpha landlord was supposed to remain a temporary figure in Noah's life. A person connected to an apartment. Nothing more. Instead, Noah found himself paying attention. Watching. Noticing things. The way Blake always checked the weather before leaving. The way he drank coffee without sugar. The way he carried stress in his shoulders. The way exhaustion appeared whenever he thought nobody was looking. Noah noticed all of it. Far more than he should. One evening he finally asked the question that had been bothering him. Do you ever sleep? Blake looked up from his laptop. What? You're always working. I sleep. When? The alpha frowned. Noah pointed dramatically. See? That hesitation was suspicious. For the first time, Blake laughed. Actually laughed. Not a small smile. Not a quiet chuckle. The sound caught Noah completely off guard. Because it transformed him. Made him look younger. Happier. And dangerously attractive. Noah immediately looked away. his heart choosing that exact moment to behave strangely. Later that night, Noah couldn't sleep. The apartment felt quiet. The city lights glowed beyond the window, his heat was nearly over. His strength was returning. Soon everything would go back to normal. The thought should have reassured him. Instead it felt disappointing. Because normal meant distance. Normal meant Blake returning to being just his landlord. Normal meant pretending none of this had happened. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. The bedroom door opened slightly. Blake stood there. Couldn't sleep? Noah blinked. How did you know? The alpha pointed. You've sighed 5 times in 10 minutes. Oh. I counted. That's weird. It is. Neither moved. The silence felt surprisingly comfortable. Then Blake spoke. You're doing better. The words sounded relieved. As though he'd been genuinely worried. The realization settled warmly in Noah's chest. Thanks for staying. Blake leaned against the doorway. For a moment, neither looked away. The atmosphere shifted. Something unspoken lingering between them. Neither quite willing to acknowledge it. Then Blake smiled faintly. Get some sleep, Noah. And just like that, the moment disappeared. The alpha closed the door, leaving Noah alone with racing thoughts. And one increasingly dangerous realization. Maybe the problem wasn't that Blake Hayes was nothing like Noah expected. Maybe the real problem was that Noah was beginning to like what he found instead. 3 days later, Noah was officially back on his feet. Unfortunately, being healthy again came with a new problem. He no longer had an excuse to spend every day with Blake. The realization annoyed him more than it should have. A lot more. Especially because Blake seemed determined to return everything to normal. No more checking in every few hours. No more soup deliveries. No more sitting in Noah's apartment late into the evening. The alpha had gone back to handling landlord duties. As if nothing unusual had happened. As if Noah hadn't spent nearly a week discovering that the intimidating owner of Hayes Apartments was secretly the kindest person he'd ever met. Which, frankly, felt unfair. Very unfair. Because Noah hadn't gone back to normal at all. You're staring again. Noah nearly dropped his coffee. Across the lobby, Mrs. Dawson looked entirely too pleased with herself. The elderly woman sat comfortably in one of the chairs near the mailboxes. Watching him apparently. Noah immediately looked away from where Blake was fixing a loose light fixture. I wasn't staring. You were. I wasn't. You absolutely were. Noah groaned. Mrs. Dawson smiled. The woman enjoyed causing trouble. That much had become obvious. He's attractive. No. He is. No. He's objectively attractive. Noah rubbed a hand across his face. Why are we discussing my landlord? Mrs. Dawson's smile widened. Because you're discussing him. I haven't said anything. You don't have to. The elderly beta pointed dramatically. Your face says plenty. Noah considered moving to another building just to escape this conversation. Across the lobby, Blake climbed down from a ladder. The alpha glanced in their direction, immediately suspicious. What are you two talking about? Nothing. The answer came far too quickly. Blake's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Dawson looked delighted. He's lying. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Noah was sure he was never speaking to either of them again. The following week should have been uneventful. Instead, everything changed. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Noah had just returned from class when he noticed an unfamiliar moving truck outside the building. Several boxes sat near the entrance. A woman stood beside them. Omega. Probably late 20s. Maybe 30. She looked tired. Nervous and uncomfortable. The kind of expression people wore when starting over somewhere new. Noah offered a polite smile while passing. The woman smiled back. Then the building doors opened. And Blake stepped outside. The moment he saw her, he froze. The reaction was so strange that Noah stopped walking. The woman looked equally surprised. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then, Blake. The woman's voice was soft and careful. Like someone approaching a wounded animal. The alpha's expression became impossible to read. You came back. The word sounded almost disbelieving. The woman laughed quietly. I did. Noah stood nearby pretending not to eavesdrop. A skill he was becoming increasingly good at. The conversation continued. Awkwardly. Uncomfortably. Like two people carrying years of unfinished history. Eventually Blake helped carry her boxes inside without another word. Leaving Noah standing on the sidewalk confused. The answer arrived later that evening unfortunately. Noah had been hoping for something boring. Maybe an old friend. Maybe a cousin. Instead he found himself sitting in Mrs. Dawson's apartment drinking tea. Which should have been his first warning. Because the woman always knew everyone's business. Her name is Emily. Noah nearly choked. You know who I'm asking about? Mrs. Dawson looked offended. Of course. That's concerning. It's experience. It's terrifying. The elderly woman waved dismissively. Then her expression softened. She used to live here. Noah frowned. When? Years ago. Something about the answer felt important. Mrs. Dawson stared into her tea. The change in mood immediately caught Noah's attention. Then she sighed. He blames himself. The words confused him. Who? Blake. Noah sat straighter, immediately interested. Mrs. Dawson noticed. He won't tell you himself. No kidding. He thinks it's his fault. Noah waited. The woman continued. Years ago, Emily hit a dangerous heat. The room fell silent. A terrible feeling settled into Noah's stomach. Suddenly several pieces began connecting. She nearly died. Noah stared. The older woman looked toward the window. She lived alone back then, didn't want help. Didn't want anyone to know. The words felt painfully familiar. Noah remembered his own heat. The fear. The embarrassment. The stubbornness. He could easily imagine making the same choices. Emily had simply been less fortunate. Blake found her. Mrs. Dawson's voice softened. Barely in time. The image formed immediately. An empty apartment. A frightened Omega. A terrified Alpha. Noah suddenly understood everything. The rule had never been punishment. It had never been judgment. It had been fear. That night, Noah couldn't stop thinking about it, Emily and Blake. And the guilt. Eventually he found himself standing outside Blake's apartment. Which was a terrible idea. Yet somehow he knocked anyway. The door opened almost immediately. Blake looked surprised. Noah? For a moment neither spoke. Then Noah asked the question. How long have you blamed yourself? The Alpha went completely still. The silence that followed stretched painfully. Noah immediately knew he'd guessed correctly. Blake looked away first. His jaw tightening. You talked to Mrs. Dawson. It wasn't a question. Noah. How long? The Alpha exhaled slowly. Then laughed. A humorless sound. 6 years. The answer hit harder than Noah expected. 6 years punishing himself. The realization hurt unexpectedly. Because suddenly Noah understood why Blake always looked tired. Why he worked constantly. Why he carried the building on his shoulders. Why he cared so much. Emily survived. The words escaped before Noah could stop them. Blake smiled faintly. Yes. Then why? Because I should have noticed sooner. The answer came immediately. Like he'd repeated it thousands of times. Maybe he had. Noah stepped forward without thinking. He placed a hand on Blake's arm. The contact lasted only a second. Maybe less. Yet both of them froze. The moment felt strangely intimate. Neither moved. Neither looked away. Then Noah spoke softly. You can't save everyone. Blake stared at him. Something vulnerable appeared in his eyes. For the first time since meeting him, Noah saw the loneliness hidden beneath everything else. And it broke his heart. This wasn't a crush anymore. This wasn't simple attraction. This wasn't admiration. Somewhere between soup and late-night conversations and quiet kindness. Noah had fallen for his alpha landlord. And judging by the way his heart was currently trying to escape his chest, he was in serious trouble. Falling in love, Noah discovered, was a terrible experience. Not because love itself was terrible. Because it was inconvenient. Extremely inconvenient. Particularly when the person responsible happened to be your landlord. And an alpha. And completely unaware of your feelings. Noah spent the next week trying very hard not to think about Blake Hayes. The attempt failed immediately. Monday morning Blake held the lobby door open for him. Noah nearly walked into a wall afterward. Tuesday afternoon Blake remembered the date of one of Noah's exams. A date Noah himself had nearly forgotten. Wednesday evening, the alpha left a container of homemade pasta outside Noah's apartment. With a note. Eat something besides noodles. Noah spent 10 minutes smiling at the note like an idiot. By Thursday, he was considering dramatic solutions. Maybe transferring universities. Maybe moving countries. Maybe joining a monastery. Anything seemed preferable to this. Unfortunately, life wasn't finished making things worse. It started with Emily. The Omega had settled into the building surprisingly well. Within days she seemed to know everyone. Within 2 weeks she somehow knew everything. A terrifying talent. One Noah should have respected more. Instead he made the mistake of having coffee with her. So. Noah immediately became suspicious. So? You like him? The coffee nearly came out of his nose. What? You like Blake? No. Emily raised an eyebrow. The kind of eyebrow that clearly didn't believe him. Noah. I don't. You do. I don't. You absolutely do. Noah groaned. Why is everyone in this building obsessed with my love life? Emily laughed. Because apparently that wasn't a denial. Which, unfortunately, it wasn't. The Omega leaned forward. Trust me. No. You look at him the same way I used to look at celebrity interviews. Noah covered his face. Oh my God. Emily laughed harder. Unfortunately, things got even worse. Because once Emily pointed it out, Noah started noticing things. Not about himself. But about Blake. Things he probably shouldn't have noticed. Like how Blake always seemed to know when Noah skipped meals. Or how the alpha somehow appeared whenever Noah was carrying something heavy. Or how he remembered random details from conversations months earlier. The observations kept piling up. Until one evening, Noah finally asked. "Why do you keep doing that?" Blake glanced up from the paperwork on his desk. "Doing what?" "Looking after me." The question seemed to catch him off guard. The alpha looked genuinely confused. "As your landlord?" "No. As a person." Silence followed. Then Blake shrugged. "You matter." The answer came so naturally. So casually. As if it should have been obvious. Noah's heart nearly stopped. Because Blake returned to his paperwork immediately afterward. Completely unaware of the damage he'd just done. Meanwhile, Noah sat there trying to remember how breathing worked. The following Friday introduced a brand new problem. His name was Tyler. And Noah disliked him immediately. Not because Tyler had actually done anything wrong. Because Tyler arrived looking like the physical embodiment of bad decisions. Tall. Attractive. Confident. The kind of alpha who knew he was attractive. Which somehow made it worse. Noah encountered him while checking his mail. The alpha smiled instantly. "You must be Noah." Warning bells immediately sounded. "Do I know you?" "No." The smile widened. "I'm Tyler." That explained absolutely nothing. Fortunately, or unfortunately, Blake appeared seconds later. And immediately looked annoyed. "Why are you here?" Tyler grinned. "That's how you greet old friends?" "Friends?" Noah looked between them. The atmosphere felt strange. Almost competitive. Tyler noticed immediately. People like Tyler always noticed everything. Especially opportunities. His attention shifted toward Noah. Then back toward Blake. Then toward Noah again. The alpha's grin became downright dangerous. "Oh." Blake sighed, already exhausted. "Don't. You're protective." "No." "You are." "No." Tyler looked delighted. Noah looked confused. Blake looked like he regretted waking up that morning. The conversation somehow deteriorated from there. Later that night, Noah learned the truth. Tyler was Blake's oldest friend. Which explained several things. Including why the man seemed completely immune to Blake's intimidating personality. Unfortunately, Tyler also possessed the observational skills of a detective. Meaning Noah's crush lasted approximately 20 minutes before discovery. Maybe less. "You like him?" Noah nearly dropped his drink. "Not again." Tyler looked unbearably pleased. "You all need hobbies." The alpha laughed. "That's not a denial." "It never is." Noah pointed accusingly. "You're the problem." "I know." The man sounded proud of that fact. Noah hated him instantly. The truly embarrassing part? Tyler wasn't the only one noticing. Apparently everyone else had started noticing too. Including Blake. At least partially. The alpha couldn't identify the feelings. But he definitely noticed something had changed. Which led to increasingly awkward interactions. For example, one evening Noah tripped over a loose step. Blake caught him before he hit the ground. Which was perfectly normal. The problem was neither moved afterward. Noah became painfully aware of everything. The alpha's hand around his arm. The warmth of his body. The closeness. The scent. The eye contact. The fact that Blake looked equally aware. Then someone cleared their throat loudly. Mrs. Dawson appeared out of nowhere like a matchmaking demon. Both men immediately jumped apart. While Mrs. Dawson smiled. By Sunday, Noah was convinced the universe hated him. Because the tension between him and Blake had become impossible to ignore. Not just for him. For both of them. Conversations lingered longer. Silences felt heavier. Every glance seemed to last a little too long. Neither knew what to do about it. Neither wanted to acknowledge it. Which naturally made everything worse. The breaking point arrived during a thunderstorm. Noah had been studying in the building's common room. Alone. Or so he thought. Blake appeared carrying coffee. Without asking, he placed a cup beside Noah. Exactly how Noah liked it. Noah stared at the coffee. Then at Blake. Then back at the coffee. His chest hurt in the best possible way. You remembered. Blake looked confused. The coffee. Oh. For the first time, the alpha seemed embarrassed. The sight was devastatingly attractive. I remember things. Noah laughed softly. Apparently. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, the room felt strangely quiet. The atmosphere shifted again. That same dangerous feeling. The one that kept appearing whenever they were alone. Neither looked away. Neither spoke. Then Blake took a slow breath. As though preparing to say something important. Something significant. Something that had been building for weeks. Noah's pulse quickened. The alpha opened his mouth. And a crash echoed from upstairs. Followed immediately by someone yelling. Both men jumped. The moment shattered instantly. I should check that. Noah nodded. Trying very hard not to look disappointed. The alpha hesitated, just briefly. Then walked away, leaving Noah staring after him. Because he had a horrible feeling. If that interruption hadn't happened, one of them might have said something neither could take back. The first person to realize Blake Hayes was in love turned out to be Tyler. Unfortunately, the second person to realize was Blake himself. Even more unfortunately, the discovery happened 2 days after the thunderstorm incident. And it happened because Tyler refused to mind his own business. You like him? Blake didn't even look up from the paperwork on his desk. No. Tyler snorted. You absolutely do. No. You remembered his coffee order. The older alpha's smile widened. That's not normal landlord behavior. Blake continued writing. Determined not to engage. Tyler continued anyway. As a matter of fact, most landlords don't know their tenants' coffee preferences. They also don't carry groceries for them. They don't cancel meetings because a tenant has the flu. The pen stopped moving. Tyler immediately noticed, like a shark smelling blood. There it is. Blake sighed heavily. The sound of a man losing a battle he never wanted to fight. The problem wasn't that Tyler was wrong. The problem was that he was right. Because somewhere between checking on Noah during his heat and bringing him meals afterward, something had changed. The young Omega had somehow become part of his routine. Part of his thoughts. Part of his life. And now the realization sat heavily in his chest. Impossible to ignore. Because Noah wasn't just anyone. He was younger. A tenant. A student. Someone Blake was supposed to protect. Not fall in love with. Yet apparently nobody had informed his heart. Meanwhile, Noah was having problems of his own. Specifically, he was trying to stop loving Blake. The attempt was going terribly. You're miserable. Emily looked entirely too pleased by this observation. Noah glared. Thank you. You're welcome. The Omega sipped her tea. Then smiled. You should tell him. No. Why not? Because I enjoy dignity. Emily laughed. Noah. I'm serious. So am I. The woman leaned forward. You think he doesn't feel it? Noah immediately looked away. Because he had asked himself that question. And the answer never changed. Blake was kind to everyone. Helpful to everyone. Noah wasn't special. The thought hurt more than he wanted to admit. That evening, disaster struck. Not a huge disaster. Just enough of one. Apartment 4C suffered a burst pipe. Because emergencies enjoyed terrible timing. Water flooded the hallway. Several tenants panicked. One person screamed. Another slipped. Which meant Blake spent the next 3 hours dealing with it. Noah found him around 2 in the morning. Still working. Still soaked. Still refusing to rest. The Alpha sat on the hallway floor surrounded by tools. Exhaustion visible across every inch of his face. Something about the sight made Noah's chest ache. You need sleep. Blake looked up then smiled slightly. So do you. The smile should have been illegal. Noah was fairly certain there were laws against smiles like that. There should be. The repair took longer than expected. Meaning several tenants couldn't return to their apartments. Including Noah. The only available space happened to be the building office. Which contained 1 couch, 1 desk and 1 Blake. Noah considered sleeping outside. This is ridiculous. Blake looked up from his laptop. It is. Neither moved. The office suddenly felt much smaller and Noah hated it. Because being close to Blake was becoming increasingly dangerous. Especially when the Alpha looked tired. Apparently exhaustion made him even more attractive. Which was deeply unfair. Around 3 in the morning, they were still awake. Talking quietly about everything and nothing. University. Work. Movies. Bad childhood haircuts. The conversation flowed effortlessly. At some point Noah realized they were laughing. The realization warmed him unexpectedly. Then Blake said something that ruined him. I worry about you. The words appeared suddenly. Without warning, without preparation. Noah blinked. What? The Alpha looked surprised he'd said it aloud. For a moment he seemed to consider taking it back. Instead he continued. You work too much. Noah's pulse quickened. You don't eat properly. You never ask for help. The word sounded frustrated. Concerned. Affectionate. Noah couldn't breathe. Because nobody had ever looked at him the way Blake was looking at him now. Like he mattered. The realization terrified him. Because for one dangerous second. Hope appeared. The silence stretched. Neither looked away. Neither seemed capable of it. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. Again. Only this time it felt different. The air itself seemed charged. Noah's heartbeat thundered inside his chest. Blake wasn't moving. Neither was he. The distance between them suddenly felt very noticeable. Noah swallowed. Blake watched. The Alpha's gaze dropped briefly to Noah's lips. Then immediately returned upward. The movement lasted less than a second. Yet both noticed. Noah's heart nearly stopped, because suddenly he knew. Blake had noticed too. The moment stretched, and for one terrifying second Noah genuinely thought Blake might kiss him. The possibility crashed through him. Warm. Bright. Impossible. Then, a phone rang and both men jumped apart immediately. Blake answered the call, professional again. The moment vanished as though it had never existed. But Noah knew better. Because his heart was still racing. And judging by the look on Blake's face. So was his. Later that night, lying awake on the office couch, Noah stared at the ceiling. Sleep was impossible. His thoughts refused to cooperate with the almost kiss replaying endlessly. Maybe he imagined it. Maybe he didn't. Maybe Blake felt something. Maybe he didn't. The uncertainty was driving him insane. Across the room, Blake sat quietly at his desk, pretending to work. Neither man slept. Neither man spoke. Both thinking about the exact same thing. And neither brave enough to say it aloud. Noah knew something was wrong the moment Blake stopped looking at him. After the night in the office, everything changed. The almost kiss hung between them like a ghost. Neither mentioned it. Neither acknowledged it. Yet both remembered. And somehow that made things worse. Because now every interaction felt careful. Measured. Guarded. As though they were both afraid of crossing a line that already no longer existed. Noah hated it. The situation became significantly worse on Wednesday. Because that was the day Daniel appeared. Daniel was Noah's ex-boyfriend. And one of the few mistakes Noah genuinely regretted. The Alpha arrived unexpectedly outside the university library. Smiling. Holding coffee. Looking entirely too pleased with himself. Noah. The Omega stopped walking immediately. His stomach dropped. Oh no. Daniel laughed. Nice to see you too. Their relationship had ended over a year ago. Messily and painfully, and Noah had no interest in reopening old wounds. Yet somehow Daniel had found him anyway. I heard you moved. Noah immediately suspected mutual friends had informed him. What do you want? The Alpha's smile softened. Something almost genuine appearing. I wanted to talk. The answer made Noah nervous. Because Daniel only wanted to talk when he wanted something. Unfortunately, Daniel proved persistent. One conversation became 2. Then 3. Not because Noah wanted them. Because Daniel kept showing up. Coffee shops. Campus. The apartment building. Everywhere. The man possessed the determination of a horror movie villain. And Noah was rapidly losing patience. The real problem wasn't Daniel. The real problem was Blake. Because Blake noticed. Of course he noticed. The Alpha noticed everything. Especially when it involved Noah. The first time Blake saw Daniel, the atmosphere changed immediately. Subtly. But noticeably. Noah caught it. Emily caught it. Mrs. Dawson definitely caught it. Even Tyler caught it. Which meant it was probably obvious. That's jealousy. Tyler sounded delighted. Blake looked murderous. It isn't. It absolutely is. No. The older Alpha laughed. You practically glared a hole through that poor man. He was blocking the entrance. He was talking to Noah. Blake returned to his paperwork. Tyler grinned. The silence told him everything. Meanwhile, Noah was becoming increasingly confused. Because Blake seemed distant again. Not cold. Not rude. Just different. And after everything that had happened, the change hurt. More than he wanted to admit. The worst part was that Noah couldn't even ask about it. What was he supposed to say? Hey, are you avoiding me because we almost kissed? Absolutely not. He valued his dignity. At least a little. The breaking point arrived on Friday evening. Naturally, because disasters always happened on Fridays. Noah returned home exhausted after a terrible day, only to find Daniel waiting outside the building. Again. At this point Noah was considering obtaining a restraining order. You need a hobby. Daniel laughed. I missed you too. I didn't miss you. The Alpha winced. For a moment neither spoke. Then Daniel sighed. The amusement disappeared, replaced by something more serious. I made a mistake. Noah froze. The word surprised him. Because Daniel had never apologized before. Not once. Not ever. I know I hurt you, he said slowly. I know I screwed things up, but I'd like another chance. The world stopped. Just briefly. Not because Noah was tempted. The problem was what happened next. The building doors opened and Blake walked outside just in time to hear everything. The silence that followed felt unbearable. Daniel noticed Blake immediately. And Blake noticed Daniel too. Noah wished the ground would open and swallow him whole. The ex-alpha smiled politely. Friend of yours? Noah opened his mouth, then closed it. Because suddenly Blake was looking at him. Waiting. The expression on his face was impossible to read. And for reasons Noah couldn't explain. That hurt. Daniel eventually left. Thank God. But unfortunately, the damage remained. Noah turned toward the building. Ready to escape. Ready to avoid this entire conversation. Then Blake spoke. Was he serious? The question surprised him. What? Your ex? Noah hesitated. Yes. The alpha's jaw tightened. Just slightly. Enough to notice. Then came the question Noah wasn't prepared for. Are you considering it? Noah stared. For a moment he genuinely thought he'd misheard. Then disbelief turned into frustration. Because after everything. After all those moments. After the almost kiss. This was what Blake thought. You think I'd go back to him? The words came out harsher than intended. Blake looked surprised. Maybe even hurt. Good. Noah was hurt too. The alpha didn't answer immediately. Which somehow made everything worse. Something inside Noah finally snapped. I need to know something. Blake went still. The atmosphere changed instantly. When you look at me. His voice nearly failed. What do you see? Noah forced himself forward. Despite the fear. Despite the risk. Despite everything. Because I'm tired. The words came out quietly. I'm tired of not knowing. The confession hung between them. For several seconds Blake didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't breathe. Then something changed. Something broke. And for the first time since Noah had met him. The alpha looked terrified. Not of rejection, but of honesty. The same honesty Noah had finally embraced. And suddenly Noah knew whatever happened next, nothing between them would ever be the same again. Noah's heart hammered painfully against his ribs. He couldn't believe he'd said it. Couldn't believe he'd finally asked. Yet now that the words were out, he couldn't take them back. And maybe he didn't want to. Because he was exhausted. Exhausted from wondering. Exhausted from hoping. Exhausted from trying to decipher every glance and every smile and every act of kindness. He needed the truth. Even if it hurt. No, especially if it hurt. Blake stared at him for several long seconds. Then looked away. The movement felt small. Yet somehow devastating. Noah's chest tightened. This had been a mistake. A humiliating mistake. He should have stayed quiet. Should have protected himself. I see someone who matters. The word stopped every thought in Noah's head. Blake wasn't looking at him anymore. His gaze rested somewhere beyond the apartment courtyard. As though the confession was easier if he wasn't looking directly at the person causing it. The alpha laughed softly. A nervous sound. One Noah had never heard before. I see someone who makes me worry. Noah couldn't breathe. I see someone who works too hard. Blake swallowed. I see someone who thinks he has to carry everything alone. The words grew quieter. More vulnerable. I see someone who has become the first thing I think about in the morning. Noah froze. And the last thing I think about at night. The world disappeared. There was only Blake. Only his voice. Only the impossible truth unfolding between them. The Alpha finally looked at him. And Noah had never seen him look so exposed. You asked what I see. His voice dropped. Barely above a whisper. I see someone I've fallen in love with. For one horrible second Noah thought he might cry. Not because he was sad. Because he'd spent months convincing himself this wasn't possible. Months preparing for rejection. Months teaching himself how to live with feelings that would never be returned. And suddenly, they were returned. Every single one of them. Then Noah laughed. A strange, disbelieving laugh. You picked a terrible time to tell me. Blake blinked. What? You waited until I emotionally embarrassed myself first. For the first time that evening, the Alpha smiled. Blake smiled. I'm sorry. No, you're not. I'm not. Noah laughed again. The tension finally breaking. Relief rushed through him so quickly it almost made him dizzy. The smile slowly faded. Not because anything was wrong. Because something else had taken its place. Something softer. Something neither could ignore anymore. Blake stepped closer. Only one step. Yet it felt enormous. Noah's pulse immediately accelerated. The Alpha hesitated. Can I? Yes. The answer came far too quickly. Both men laughed. Then Blake lifted a hand. Slowly. Giving Noah every opportunity to pull away. Noah didn't. Not even a little. Warm fingers brushed against his cheek. Like Blake still couldn't quite believe this was real. Maybe he couldn't. Noah wasn't sure he could either. Then the distance disappeared. And Blake kissed him. It wasn't dramatic. Wasn't desperate. Wasn't rushed. It was simply right. The kind of kiss that felt less like a beginning and more like finally arriving somewhere you'd been trying to reach for a very long time. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. Neither seemed capable of stopping. The next morning was a disaster. Because apparently everyone in Hayes' apartments possessed supernatural powers. That was the only explanation. Noah walked into the lobby and immediately found Mrs. Dawson waiting and smiling. Oh, finally. Noah stopped. Immediately suspicious. What does that mean? The elderly woman rolled her eyes. It took both of you long enough. Across the room, Emily burst out laughing. Tyler nearly choked on his coffee. Noah considered turning around and leaving. Possibly forever. The worst part was that Blake wasn't helping. The Alpha looked mildly embarrassed. Which somehow confirmed everything. Mrs. Dawson pointed dramatically. I've been waiting 6 months. 6 months? Noah asked. Honestly, it might have been longer. Emily nodded. Oh, definitely longer. Noah stared at all of them, horrified. You all knew? The entire room answered simultaneously. Yes. Life settled into something surprisingly comfortable after that. The kind of happiness Noah had spent years trying to convince himself he didn't need. And somehow finding anyway. That night, Noah found himself sitting beside Blake on the apartment building roof. The city stretched endlessly before them. Lights glowing in the darkness. For a while neither spoke. Then Noah leaned against him. The movement felt natural now. Blake wrapped an arm around his shoulders, just as naturally. "You know," Noah said softly. I almost hated you." The alpha laughed. "I know. The first day. I know. I thought you were the world's biggest jerk." Blake looked offended. "I'm not." "You absolutely are." The alpha laughed harder. The sound echoed across the rooftop. Warm and genuine. Noah smiled, because he'd come to love that sound. Maybe more than anything. Eventually the conversation faded. Comfortable silence replacing it. The city sparkled below. The night air felt cool. And Noah found himself thinking about the strangest thing. The rule. The one that had started everything. The rule he'd hated so much. The rule he'd judged. The rule he finally understood. "You know." Blake glanced down. "What?" Noah smiled. "If I hadn't gone into heat." The alpha's expression softened immediately. Neither needed to finish the thought. Because they both knew. That awful week. That terrifying night. The moment everything changed. The moment Blake broke his own rule. The moment Noah stopped being just another tenant. And became something infinitely more important. Blake pressed a kiss against his forehead. His answer came quietly. "I know." Noah smiled. Then settled closer. And for the first time in a very long time. Everything felt exactly right. The apartment that had once been nothing more than a place to survive had become a home. The strict alpha landlord he once feared had become the person he trusted most. And the man who once said no heats in the house had unknowingly led Noah straight to the love of his life.